Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, the podcast dedicated to simplifying the commercial real estate industry for the masses. Each week, we sit down with industry experts to dissect the many facets of commercial real estate and extract valuable lessons you can apply to your business. Whether you're a new or seasoned business owner or investor, the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast will be your go-to resource for all your commercial real estate needs. Now, here are your hosts, Raphael and Jeff Walston.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. I'm your host, Raphael here with my co-host, Jeff Walston. How's it going, man?
It's going great. Loving the Kentucky weather. It's bright and sunny, although it has cooled off, but it's Kentucky weather. From
my understanding, we were getting a cold front from the north. And I mean, again, Kentucky, especially in March, April, even sometimes in May, you really don't know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's beautiful. Sometimes it's raining. Sometimes it's cold. So again, you take it with punches. And I mean, the summertime's gorgeous. Springtime's really beautiful. Fall time is obviously very impressive as well. So cannot complain about that. But as far as our interview guest today, it's someone that I've actually been following for quite some time and I admired from afar for a while. And his name's Jerome Myers. He really is a jack of all trades. He got his degree in engineering, was in the construction business for a long time for a Fortune 550 company. And then he got into the commercial real estate business, primarily as in the multifamily space. And so now he's a real estate investor, a coach, you name it, he pretty much does it. In today's episode, we really got pretty deep in a lot of different topics, which was really awesome to do. We talked a lot about his getting started in the multifamily space, his first deal, some of the challenges he faced. We talked about his mindset and how do you approach problems. As from an engineering background, he obviously had a unique way of how he approached problems, and then understanding how he was able to overcome adversity and really deal with stress. Because again, and he also mentioned a lot of concepts related to partnerships and, how do you get into business with someone and then see how they react in very stressful situations. And that was something that was quite enlightening as well. We also touched in some of the topics of understanding how to build a brand and how it's enabled him to be able to, leverage these new relationships into greater and bigger things. And then finally, we touched on a topic that's something that is not talked about a lot, but is really a topic that should be discussed more, which is really the diversity in commercial real estate. We wanted to make sure that we put on the forefront that how do we find ways in order to maximize the talent that's in the industry, regardless of what you look like. So I thought that really it was extremely enlightening. He provided a whole ton of value, and I really think you guys are going to gain a ton from the actual episode. Jeff, do you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Jerome, his branding, we go back to that. It just, he took the red pill. He took it all away, and you learn more about his 6 pillars through his coaching process and everything. And it's a great podcast to listen to, and highly recommend you guys looking out for him and reaching out to him and listen to our podcast. So
definitely, yeah, and definitely follow him on LinkedIn. But without further ado, we really want to just go ahead and dive in the episode. So let's go ahead and do that. Hey, Jerome, great to see you. Thanks for coming on the podcast. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
For those of you guys who don't know, Jerome is extremely active on LinkedIn. He does also co-host a podcast with, I believe, Logan Freeman, who is a multifamily investor in Kansas City. So he's just super active in the commercial real estate industry, and we're just super happy to have him on the call today. So I just wanted to reach out and ask you, just to start out, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, trying to get a feel for who you are as a person and also as an investor?
Yeah, man, I'm a corporate America dropout, kind of the long and the short of it. I built a $20 million division for Fortune 550, and my reward for that was laying folks off 2 years in a row. And that just didn't sit well with me. So I decided I was going to go grab this dream off a shelf that I kind of made up sophomore year in college. Me and my buddy Duran were sitting on the stoop, and we were doing some math because that's what engineering students do in their free time. I was paying $395. I had 2 roommates paying $395. Same thing was happening downstairs for him. We multiplied it out across the complex. The guy was making $700,000 a year. We never saw him. We never talked to him. And it was at that point that we realized that you could decouple your time from money. Only problem was I'm the son of a soldier and a stay-at-home mom, so we didn't have people coming and hang out at our house who had multi-million-dollar real estate portfolios. And so I figured, hey, you go get a good job, you make some money, you get some net worth, you get some liquidity, and then I guess you invest in real estate from there. Only problem with that, my brother, is I got to the end of the road and I started knocking on the doors at banks because I was like, oh, yeah, I'll just walk out and I'll just shift the commercial real estate. It'll be perfect. And all the banks told me no. There's about 10 of them that I checked with. And I said, well, this deal absolutely makes sense. Why won't you lend? And he said, well, you don't have any experience. So I started running down the qualifications: professional engineer, contractor, MBA, PMP, all this stuff. And they were like, yeah, none of that really matters. We want to know that you can actually execute this business plan, and we want to see that you've done it before. And it was at that point I realized that I still hadn't grown my network in a way that was meaningful compared to when I was a sophomore in college, when I was trying to get to this goal of being a real estate professional. And so I started fixing and flipping houses. I'm sitting on the stoop. Guy pulls up in a white Dodge Ram. He hops out. He says, hey, bud, I'd like to check out your finishes. We're getting ready to do a project down the street. I just want to make sure we bring something to market that is competitive with what you guys are doing. And I was like, sure, come in. And I'm poking my chest out because I feel good because somebody wants to see what we did. And this is a $90,000 rehab on a 1920s build. And he walks in, he's like, man, you took that wall out and you put the sink in the island and that granite is immaculate. And we go upstairs, he's like, man, this tile is great. And you're refinishing these hardwood floors and it's going to be a really nice spec. I was like, yeah, feeling good about myself. And he gets to the door and he stops on the threshold. He looks back at me and he says, hey, do you know anything about that building behind the Chimbo Mart? I was like, yeah, the 23-unit apartment building. He's like, yeah, that one. I said, absolutely. I tried to buy it 4 or 5 months ago. And the banks turned me away, said I didn't have any experience. He said, well, I'm getting ready to make an offer on that thing this afternoon. And I looked at him. I was like, please don't leave me out. And he said, well, what are you going to bring to the table? I said, I don't know. We can figure that out. But the banks told me that I needed to partner with somebody with experience in order to get into space. And he just kind of looked at me and said, well, what are you going to bring to the table? I said, I don't know. We'll figure that out. And he just kind of shook his head and walked down the steps, hopped in his truck and drove off. And I just knew he was going to call me, right? So that I would be part of the offer. And a week went by and another week went by and I didn't hear anything. I didn't see him. And then I get a phone call from the guy that I used to lend money to when I was in corporate America. He was a pretty big fix and flipper in the market. He said, somebody reached out to me and asked me to be the general contractor on a project that they're getting ready to buy. And it's the one that you and I talked about 4 or 5 months ago. I told them the only way that I would feel comfortable doing the deal is if you were a part of it. And so I got back to the table and I was like, man, this is outstanding. And so to kind of put a bow on the story, there's a press release because we bought it from one of the big brokerage houses, and rising real estate investor partners with proven entities in the market to revitalize Churchill townhomes. I was like, who are they talking about? And they were talking about me. But the coolest part was my phone started ringing. The banks wanted to show me what products they had. They wanted to take me out to lunch. They wanted to know what our plans were for refinance and what else we had in the pipeline. And I didn't even know what the pipeline was. I did one deal, right? And so through that, we were able to form some relationships. And then I moved back to North Carolina because that's where I grew up. And we started doing the whole building our own portfolio, writing our own contracts. And I've been fortunate enough to be the asset manager on every deal we've done so far.
Dude, that's awesome. And it's interesting you say that about banks because, again, they're just historically risk averse. So unless you're a proven commodity, a lot of times they just don't even want to bother, which is interesting. And obviously you were able to kind of leverage, your prior experience and even just that chance relationship with that one individual into something that now gave you the opportunity to kind of leverage and grow your portfolio over time. So that's really awesome. And kudos to you as an engineer. I was also an engineer. So
You still are. You weren't. You still are.
Oh no, yeah. And the cool thing about being an engineer is the way you approach problems is always going to be that, break things down into simpler parts and then attack each one and get through it. So it's super interesting though.
Thank you.
I definitely feel for you on the first time walking to that bank, and you have all these qualifications, and they just tell you, well, basically they're telling you that you're not good enough for them. It's like, what, I can do all these things, and it's happened to me. So I definitely feel I was in your shoes for sure, multiple times.
Yeah, if you don't get any credit for that, you don't get any credit for single family investing. It's chicken and egg, right? You got to find somebody to bring you in the game that's already done it before.
Yeah, definitely. So what actually got you interested in the construction industry? And then what are some of the top lessons that you learned from those experiences?
Yeah. So I got interested in the construction industry because my mom bought me Tonka trucks when I was 4 or 5. And I used to go back in the backyard and play with my Tonka trucks in the sandbox and build little cities and bridges and roads. And I just knew that I was going to be the guy that designed the building and the road and then oversaw the people that built both things. But that's not actually what happened. So, and I didn't even know that was called an engineer when I was formulating all these grand plans. I ended up getting in the power industry out of college, and I moved around, and eventually the last company was a utility contractor. They do infrastructure for Fortune 500 companies all across the country. And I mean, they put a lot of wire and pipe in. And so I got kind of recruited over to that opportunity after working for CH2M Hill, which is now, it was acquired by Jacobs. And so really large global multinational firm that was really prided in, project management expertise and deep scientific knowledge. I switched when I came out of corporate and actually got my commercial and residential contractor's license because I knew that those were the things that were going to control the business. And so I had this idea that whatever I needed in order to be able to move the projects forward, I didn't want to rely on somebody else for that certification, right? And so if I needed an engineering license, if I needed somebody to stamp the drawing, I didn't want to be beholden to somebody else to do that. If I needed to apply for a permit on a project we're working on, I didn't want to have somebody else do that for me. Now, that doesn't mean that I won't let somebody else do it, but I don't want to be held captive to somebody else's whims, because I've seen people get in a place where their project gets hijacked and they don't have another option but to continue to go down the course. And I think the last piece of it is just, I wanted to be, and I still, regardless of what I do, I want to be a subject matter expert. And I feel like the only way that you're going to be taken seriously is if you actually have the credential.
Yeah. I mean, I respect that for sure. Being in construction industry myself, I've always wanted to learn every possible aspect of every trade. So when I'm a general contractor, there's somebody who maybe has 30 years in that particular trade experience more than I do, but at least I know all the majority of the ins and outs. So like you said, somebody can't take care of you, and then they're holding that project hostage for you. And I mean, you have to finish it. There's nothing you can do. Like I mean, it's
almost
wild.
like ransom case, right? Where they've got your family held hostage and there's nothing you can do. And, I was fixing and flipping, brother. Once you get into it, the only way out is through.
Yeah.
There's only one way out. Mm-hmm. If you're going to make money, I mean, you can stop in the middle, but you're guaranteed to lose everything that you got in it.
Yeah.
So if you want to get money, if you want to make money, you have to finish the thing. And I love that part about life right now. I think a lot of people start stuff and don't finish it, right? But I played sports for a long time, and in football, you either did or you didn't, and there's kind of no middle ground there. Yeah. And with like flips and these real estate projects, you either made money or you didn't. Yeah, there's no middle ground.
No, not at all.
No, for sure. And again, this really applies to every part of life where if you don't have an understanding of what the problem is, you can get taken advantage of. I mean, it's how it is. I mean, because you have no idea how to effectively manage, your subcontractors in your case where you're dealing with a large commercial project, and that could bite you because they could be blowing smoke the entire time. And if you're not cognizant about what's being done and why it's being done, that could definitely hurt you in the long run. So I think that's some valuable lessons for people, in particular, if they're looking to get into some sort of construction or redevelopment projects, et cetera. So that's awesome. So you talk about your first commercial real estate investment deal. How did you progress through that deal? I know obviously it was a 23 unit property, which you mentioned. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the hurdles you had to overcome through the project? And then at the end of the day, was it something you held, or did you sell it off? Like how did that your first deal progress?
Yeah, we still have it. In fact, we had a call about it this morning and we're getting ready to list it. And I think we're going to do okay on the deal. We did everything, right? And part of the reason why the bank did not want to lend me money is because it was a complete gut. We did roof, siding, took walls out on the first floor, added a half bath on the first floor. And it was on a slab, so we had to jackhammer the concrete out. We added a laundry room, granite and all the other nice accoutrements that go with a upgraded property. And just for the listeners, right, we tuck rents from $695 to $1195. So you got to create a totally new ambiance there. Landscape and parking lots. We did everything. And so from the bank's perspective, that's a really complicated project to do for your first one. Yeah. Not to mention we added in HVACs because not all the units had central HVAC, and we did some electrical work to get in some recessed lights. And so they didn't feel good about it. And I'm glad they didn't lend to me because I would have went bankrupt because I would have ran out of money, right? We underestimated the construction budget and we had to do a capital call to raise money to finish the project and get to a place where we could lease it up and do all the things that you're supposed to do when you get into the deal. And that was probably one of the most humbling experiences, but it was one of those like, man, I guess the banks do know what they're doing, right? Because I would have just been out there kind of just swinging around trying to figure it out. Lessons learned. I think that was kind of the underpinning of this question. I think the biggest lesson learned for me is just make sure you know your partners. I think a lot of people romanticize the idea of getting into these business partnerships, not understanding that, personalities and communication styles and a bunch of other stuff don't always mix. And anytime that stuff doesn't mix, you have friction. And that friction can rub to the place where people get hurt. And if you're not careful, you can be the one that gets hurt. And so the one thing that I always ask folks to do who ask me about guidance on partnerships is just make sure that you've seen the person in a stressed state and see how they handled it. Are they blaming everybody else? Are they taking responsibility for whatever they could do in order to make the thing better? And just kind of walk down that line and make sure that that's somebody that you want to be around. Because if not, once you sign that loan, you're stuck. Unless you, again, want to lose money. And I don't know a lot of people who want to lose money. And so we get excited about people who have a failed partnership and they're getting ready to sell their property because we know they're going to do something irrational because the emotions involved in their partnership are not positive. And so it allows us to buy things at a pretty good deal. And so we actually have bought at least 2 properties that were in that type of situation. And it unlocks some real equity for us.
It's awesome. I'm assuming the partnership that you had with the individual that you did it with, is that, I guess, what you're referencing? Did you have any friction or in particular with?
Yeah, there's friction. So there's 5 partners in that deal, right? And so it was me helping with the construction and the property, construction and asset management. We had a partner who had big balance sheet. We have another partner who's another general contractor and actually did the construction. We have a partner that was a broker. They actually found the deal. They're going to be responsible for selling it. And we actually have our property manager who's also an investor in that deal. So, all those different skill sets with everybody's an alpha male in that group and has had a ton of success in their various careers, you absolutely have some friction. You have some rubs there.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a very valuable lesson to learn. I mean, Jeff and I are actually in a partnership as well. And I think a big part of it is, number one, having unique skill sets. Again, I've met a lot of people who are partners and they kind of have similar skill sets, and that in and of itself can be very frustrating because you both like doing the same things, or you both are very good at doing one of the same things. And that can obviously cause issues because now it's like, okay, who's going to do the stuff that, maybe we're not really good at? Or maybe what's not our highest and best use. And then obviously, like you said, communication is super, super big. And I also love the fact that you had that as your first really big commercial experience, because I'd imagine that was one of the more complex deals that you probably had to go through, and you got that out on the front end. And now it's like, okay, now I can figure most things out now that we've gone through this experience. And I'm assuming the capital call wasn't something that was very thrilling to you. Because you have to go back to your investors and say, oh, okay, well, sorry guys, we miscalculated on the front end, and now we're gonna have to figure out how we can actually make this deal functional so that long term it's actually gonna be a good deal. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So we have no investors, just the partners, right?
Just the partners. Okay.
Our focus really is on joint ventures, and so everybody who's in the deal, they're involved in the decision making, and when you screw up and you got to put more money in, well, you were part of the decision making process. There you go.
That's awesome. Well, and that maybe makes it a little bit more interesting because, again, you're in the deal, right? You as a partner are committed to this deal and everything else. So that's interesting.
Speaking of like the commercial investing and such, I'm going to kind of go back to your engineering background. How has that helped you overcome some hurdles or obstacles through the investing world of commercial real estate?
I was labeled as the guy that overthought everything in this deal. Right. So I was making things too complicated and so on and so forth. But I was right. Everything that I was worried about happened. Yeah. All of it. And maybe some stuff that I didn't think about, but everything that I raised issues about happened. And so I think it's just the systematic way of breaking down the potential risk, because I feel like we're in the risk mitigation business as operators. The whole goal is to make sure that, one, we don't lose money, and then two, the things that could make our assumptions wrong, because I hate to break it to the listeners, but everybody's guessing, right? It's all a guess. And so now you just got to mitigate the factors that make your guess right or wrong, right? And the whole goal is to figure out how to de-risk everything that you can to make your guess better. And so that's what I do. And, if I take it back to engineering, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to go back there, I used to design foundations for, 100-foot poles. And sometimes the diameter in those foundations would be 8 feet. And then it would go down 30 or 40 feet in the ground. And so I get to the final answer and I go take it over to the supervisor or one of the older engineers who were, helping me figure out what I was doing. And I get the answer. And then the guy would say, all right, now multiply by 3. There was a safety factor of 3 on that bad boy. And he's like, you never know what's going to happen. It'll be fine. And nobody ever questioned it. And we put that bad boy in, and it was a monster, and it cost a fortune, but it was what we needed. And, at the end of the day, you cannot be competitive in the market and put a safety factor of 3 on your model. But there are certain places where you do need some cushion. And I do believe there are a lot of people they are buying deals where there's no cushion. And just like if you run for years and you don't have any cushion in your knee, you're going to get arthritis, and that thing's going to hurt eventually. And the market's not going to save everybody.
Not at all.
Yeah, that's a great lesson as well. I mean, just look at it even in today's market. I mean, there's a lot of investor activity that I believe is somewhat irrational, right? There's certain assets going for prices just in the open market that if you do the underwriting on the deal, it's not going to make sense for X amount of years. And you're just projecting future cash flows to the present state, which again is not a wise way to invest your capital. But I think it's very wise of you to be able to make sure that, whatever you're approaching, whatever problem you're approaching, having cushion. And I really, like I said, I like to reiterate the engineering thought process where it's like, let's look at this big problem and break it down to small component parts and then solve the problems at that point. Because in any situation, there may be a big problem, but there's all these little branches that are coming off this big problem that you can digest one by one. And then finally you can get to your ultimate solution at the end of the day. So I value the engineering mindset extremely.
One thing I will add on that I'm paying more attention to now than I had in the past is sequence matters. I think a lot of people feel like you can just do stuff any kind of way. Just like every investor, in my opinion, is working on 4 challenges, and people do them in all different sequences. But I think the optimal sequence is knowledge, deal flow, experience, and capital. People think because you're buying something, you got to go get the capital first. But if you don't have knowledge or a deal or somebody with experience, and I'm really just talking about the bank because they're the biggest partner, right?
Yeah.
You don't need any capital, right? If you don't have knowledge in the deal, you don't need somebody with experience. If you don't have knowledge, you don't know if you have a deal or not. There's leads and deals spelled with the same letters. Very different things. Very different things. And for the listeners, I won't leave a cliffhanger. Leads are things that you can buy and you're going to lose money on. Deals are things you can make money on.
Yeah.
Right. And so knowledge, deal flow, experience, capital. If you overcome those things in that sequence, you're going to be very successful. But people start circling. Oh, I'm going to go find my experience partner. I'm going to start raising money. You go talk to people who have money and you make it very clear that you don't know what you're talking about. Guess who's not going to give you any money?
Yeah.
But, you listen to a podcast, you read a book, so you're a multifamily investor. That part rubs me raw because it's really hard. And I think you disrespect the operators when you do that. You got to make a real investment. And it's really easy for you to get in and lose your money because everybody has the same access to knowledge. And you get to evaluate the deal based on the knowledge that you have. And if you think it actually makes sense and it doesn't, and somebody knows that it doesn't, but you think it does and you buy it, and on the backside, that person that didn't think it made sense because it wasn't going to make money was right, then you get to lose the money. And so I think it's really important when we're talking about 6 and 7 and 8 figure checks that you make sure that you give it the appropriate respect and getting prepared to make that type of investment. It's not buying, $300 worth of Bitcoin. It's a very, very different thing. And it's an illiquid investment.
Especially if, like you said, you're dealing with other people's money, because then you become the steward of that money. And that should be your highest priority, is to conserve that capital and to make sure you don't lose other people's, it's on a lot. In some cases, it could be their savings that they were planning to retire with or whatever else. So 100% agree with you on that. So as you're going through the process of scaling your operations, obviously you've been doing a lot more in the multifamily space since that first deal that you did. What are some of the challenges that you faced as you were looking to scale your operations? I'm sure
I think the first one is getting over my ego and realizing I can't do everything myself. Step one, right? I'm pretty good at most things. That doesn't mean that I need to do them. Exactly. And I spent a bunch of time working really, 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 really long hours, trying to figure out and learn things that weren't going to move the needle very much. And the things that were actually going to make money for the company and bring me joy and fulfillment were getting pushed to the back burner. And so the amount of time that it took to get things done just elongated in a way that it didn't need to. I wasn't efficient. I think the second thing was I didn't go through a formal training program, right? I didn't join anybody's mentorship. I I didn't go to any of the boot camps. I did what a lot of listeners do. And that's why I'm so critical of it. I was listening to 40 hours of content each week, podcasts, YouTube, Audible books, etc. Right. And I'm going to make sure that I don't miss anything. I'm just content. And that's the most inefficient and ineffective way to grow your knowledge base, because there's always going to be these gaps, right? There's all these things that you don't know, and you don't have a framework to put things in context. And I think the last thing is, I tried early on to do it as just a brand, right? I just want to put a logo out there and let everybody interact and engage with the logo. People do business with people. People do business with people. And if they can't see you, they're not going to be excited to do anything with you. Whether it's bring you a deal, whether it's sell you a deal, whether it's put money with you, any of the things that you need to do in order to do a deal, if they don't know you and who you are, then how is that going to happen? And I think the ego of, oh, well, I don't want people to know what I got going on and so on and so forth is just a filter for, I'm not comfortable sharing myself with the world. And so once I got over that hurdle and was just like, hey, this is me. You like me or you don't, that's okay. It allowed me to let a whole lot more people know who I was. And then you go through the funnel, right? No, then they can decide whether or not they like you. And then of that subset of people who like you, those folks can decide whether or not they trust you. And all of that can happen through this podcast. There's somebody's going to listen to this thing and they're going to say Jerome's arrogant, or he's an idiot, or man, he's amazing and authentic, right? They're going to figure all that out through this, and them growing a relationship with you by subscribing to your podcast and listening to you ask these amazing questions week in and week out. They're all forming their opinion without you actually having to sit down and talk to them one-to-one. And, you know, as of late, I've probably done like 250 podcasts or something at this point. And so people will say, hey, I'd love to get on the phone with you and learn more about you and your business. I'm not going to do that. That's all captured. And, you know, there's been some amazing guests or amazing hosts who've invested their time to dig into me and what I'm about and what I think and how I feel. And so, you know, do me the favor of taking that time, and so that when we're together, we can move to higher level problems. And that allows you to really reduce the amount of people that you're talking to on a daily or weekly basis and really get down to the nitty gritty and making progress, because they've already decided whether they like and trust you or not.
Yeah. And they've made a commitment to expanding their thought process, because again, you've done 250 podcast episodes. If someone watches 50 of them and they come with thoughtful questions and they've actually taken action in their life that is based on the advice or whatever you've done, that's a different person than someone who just sees you on a YouTube video, sees the cool things you're doing and says, oh, that'd be cool, and want to have a conversation with you, grab coffee. That's something that kind of frustrates me at times. It's just, there's a complete difference between someone who listens to content and likes the idea of doing something versus someone who actually listens to it and takes action. So I 100% agree with you on that front.
And just at a higher level, it's not a great use of your time, right? They're coming to you because they want something from you, but they're not willing to make any investment in you. And I learned, and this kind of goes back to the question we were talking about before, I've learned that people will take from you as much as you're willing to give. And there's a lot of people who don't feel obligated to give something in return. And you have to teach the world how to engage with you, because if you don't, then they'll take advantage of you.
The book I read the book Boundaries, and that kind of changed my whole perspective on how I approach my interactions in all walks of life, with my family, with my friends, with people who interact with me in a business setting. I mean, it was a phenomenal book that kind of taught me, hey, look, I mean, you want to help a lot of people. You want to be able to make an impact in this world, but the best way you can do that is to set boundaries and be able to, you know, maximize the amount of time with the appropriate people so that, you know, you can really move the needle. So that's awesome.
Oh, I love that you just said that, because I think, we're all guys here, and I don't know like how your listenership breaks out, but just in general, guys are typically the breadwinner. And so we say we're doing all this stuff for our family, right? And then we get home and we don't have any energy for them because we've given it to everybody else. And I just think it's backwards. Just like when we're kind, like we got a stranger and we're super kind to the stranger, but then we can just be rude to our kid or be mean to our partner. None of that makes sense to me. Like, those are the folks who've invested the most in you. And so aren't we obligated to make sure that we can show up for them in a way that honors the commitment that they've made to us?
Yeah, for sure. And I know Jeff's done a little bit of this in his life, especially on the work side, because it's very easy to just work 80 hours a week trying to get everything done and not have the appropriate time for your family. So,
yeah, that was one of the big things that made me start my actual company. That was the one of the things that I went to other people in construction companies and here's all my experience. Here's what I can do. But hey, I'm a single dad, so I got to be able to take off if the school calls, on my time. I gotta take care of that business. I can't. So and they just weren't willing to do that, which a lot of times I don't blame them. I can see their side of it as well. But for me, the family's important. So I started my own construction company, and that just made it's just like it's a mindset. So we were talking before this and kindred spirits, right? The wolf pack, and your family's your pack. And as an alpha or even an omega, whoever's listening, it's like, you got to watch out for your pack. I mean, that's the first thing. Like, you wake up in the morning, that's who you watch out for, in my opinion. And so, yeah, I mean, that's how I live my life. And that's how I think people should view life. Yeah, you're going out to make the bread and make that money for your family, but you also need to schedule. That's what I found helpful, is schedule time in my actual work schedule that says family time. Mm-hmm. And if someone calls and says, "Hey, can you schedule it here?" No, I'm scheduled out. Sorry.
Locked in.
Yeah. So they can't, I mean, you can't chip away at that. So that's one of the, I mean, a lot of the great people that's lived and walked and lived and experienced this life, at the very end, what's the one thing that's like that they have regrets? What is it? It's, I didn't get to spend enough time with family.
Yeah.
I mean, me getting on a rant here, but speaking of mindset, how important for your mindset has it been for you in your current success? Like, how's that taken you to be where you were and where you were started? And
yeah, man, you guys mentioned compression, right? So
yeah,
Logan and I get on the mic once a week and just talk shop, man. We believe that Tim Grover came up with the 3 levels: cooler, cleaner, and
closer.
And we felt like, cleaner was the apex for his body of knowledge. And we're like, man, but there's got to be more. And what Jeff just described is that next level where you're an apex performer in the workplace and at home. You don't have to give up. You don't have to decide which one you're going to do, right? You can do all of that. And it's by honoring your boundaries. I loved your word choice. You can't chip away at that. That's you making the decision and then honoring that decision that's not something that's movable.
Yeah.
And most people will say, oh, yeah, well, they'll understand, right? Because I'm doing it for them. But the kid never really understands when you don't show up for the thing.
No.
They don't. They say it's okay, but they don't ever. They're never really okay with it. They're never good because they want you there to see it. That's why they say, "Mommy or Daddy, look at me," right? They want you to see them. So, yeah, man, I think mindset is everything. It is the difference between you getting what you want and not. It is the difference between you doing that thing that's the right thing to do when nobody's looking and not. And Logan was texting me the other day and I sent him a David Goggins video. He was like, man, but how do you feel about the cussing? Because I rarely hear you use curse words. And I was like, I want to be the person that my kids think I am when they're not around.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what my little girls are going to hopefully grow up and try to marry and build a family and relationship with, right? And so if I'm not truly that example, I'm only putting a mask on in order to say, hey, this is what you want. And then, you know, they go meet somebody and it's like they get to see the whole thing, right? Because they're together all the time and that person lets their guard down. I set them up for failure, right? So I actually have to live that out. And so for me, you know, self-image and mindset, accountability is really just making promises to yourself and then keeping them, right? That's all mindset is. And I guess the one thing you can pile on top of that is, what's your standard, right? What do you expect? What is it that you have? Because that's what gets met. Our wants don't get met. It's what do you have to have? Our needs, our standards. That's what gets met.
Yeah. And a commitment to having high integrity where, you know, your public face and your private face are the same, right? Because like you said, you set a certain standard for yourself and then you try to live up to that standard as best you can. And obviously no one can possibly be perfect. I mean, everyone has their faults and everything else, but you try to become the idealized version of yourself and try to commit yourself to being the best version that you could possibly be in this lifetime. So yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to see what their full potential is over time? So I think that that's a great point.
I wanted to jump in on that because you said, who doesn't want to live out their fullest potential? The person who doesn't want to live out their fullest potential is the person who always wants to be comfortable.
Sure.
Because you can't get to your fullest potential. There is no growth. There is no stretch in the comfort. And so if you're chasing comfort, if you're chasing pleasure all the time, you're never going to make your greatest reaches or strides or growth ever. Can't do it.
100%. And I was actually on Tyler Chesser, and I believe you know him as well. I was on his Elevate podcast recently, and we talked about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because again, it's one of those things where you put yourself in an uncomfortable position and then you kind of morph yourself into feeling comfortable in that position. All of a sudden you put yourself in another uncomfortable position and you morph until you become comfortable in that position. Yeah. And that's where real growth occurs. You know, finding an opportunity to put yourself in a position where you may not know it all. I'm assuming in that first deal, it was probably super uncomfortable throughout the entire process to try to learn exactly what you needed to do to get this deal done. But after the experience, you're a completely different person than you were when you first started. I mean, just
without question.
Yeah, because you put yourself in that comfortable position and you were willing to do so. So I agree with you 100% on that front.
Now, shout out to Tyler Chesser. He called me a spirit animal.
Spirit animal. There's a common theme here. There's a wolf pack right here. That's awesome, man. So for those listeners who are listening right now, if you guys don't know, Jerome, the common thing is I took the red pill. You're also a coach. So I wanted to kind of touch on that front because I feel like acting as a coach teaches you a lot of lessons in life and in business. I've done coaching in the past as well. And I can tell you from personal experience, it is completely different than what the mindset you go into it. So can you kind of tell me about, number one, your coaching experience, and number two, how have you applied the lessons you've learned through that into your business to really take it to the next level?
Yeah. So I didn't go through a multifamily program, but I was fortunate enough to be mentored by a division president when I got started in my corporate career. And the biggest gift that he gave me was access to his coach. And so I started the process. And after about 2 years, I started looking around, and my career was very different than the other folks that were in my peer group, both at the company and then externally, folks like I went to college with. And so everybody that performs at an apex level has a coach. There isn't a single person, Tiger Woods, Jordan, all of them, Kobe, everybody who, and people try to condense it. Oh, it's just sports. You want to crush at whatever you're doing. You need that person. And we keep going to the Wolf reference. I'll go back there. I think the alphas end up in a place where they look to the left and right and there's nobody to talk to. Nobody really understands what they're going through. They can't vent down because then they create fear within the pack, right? Because, our fearless leader is driving ahead, and for them to say, I don't really know what to do here is really, really, really uncomfortable. And so for me, I spend my time going around the country via Zoom, spending time with apex performers who are at the peak of their game and forcing them to come out of the day-to-day operations of their business and think about where they want their business 3, 6, 12 months out, and then even further, what's the North Star, and making sure they have absolute clarity around that and ensure that they're cultivating and creating habits that will generate that end result. The red pill is our model for a centered life. And we talked about self-image early, right? But above that would be relationships. So you fix a relationship with yourself, keep promises to yourself, self-image. Relationships. Now that you've fixed the relationship with yourself, you can demand accountability from the people that you are engaging with, right? Often we just want people around, so we let them do whatever, right? And you talked about the boundaries, but we shouldn't do that because we teach them how to treat us.
Yeah.
And you go up to the next level, which is work, right? And so if you've got a great relationship with yourself, you're engaging and interacting with others in a very positive way, setting accountability and having the appropriate boundaries, that's going to be magnetic in the workplace. You're going to have people wanting you to have more responsibility because you're able to solve problems. You're going to have people wanting to work with and for you because they respect you. And that's kind of rare these days. And so we fix those 3 things. That's the nucleus. That's where all your stress comes from, guys, gals, right? That's where all the stress comes from. You get that situated, then you go up to the next level, which is health. If you fix your stress, the habits that you have that are self-destructive, right? The drinking, the numbing, the alcohol, the food, whatever you want to call it, right? All those things that you do to make yourself feel better, you can manage those. And then you can start doing mental health with meditation, exercise, and you can run through the whole gamut. And so that's level 4. Level 5 is prosperity. Level 5 is prosperity because you need to fix your health before you make your wealth. Because if you make the wealth before the health, you'll give up all your wealth trying to get your health. And so I don't like when people have to go backwards or once they start going through the process, right? I want you to continue to ascend. And so, in the prosperity thing, we want to create overflow. We want to create abundance. And out of that abundance, you're able to give. The flight attendant gets one thing right, at least one thing right every time they go through the pre-flight talk. When the mask drops, put yours on first, then help other people. If you're not healthy, if you're not in abundance, you can't give to others because you can't give what you don't have. And so the top level is significance. And this is giving from what you have. It could be your time, talent, or treasures, but it's your ability to go off and make a positive impact in the lives of others. And that's why I'm always excited to jump on with folks who are leading podcasts, because the podcast community gave so much to me when I got started. And I know there's somebody out there who hopefully will listen to this and will pick up at least one nugget that they can go apply as soon as this thing is over that will make their life better. And so 6 levels: self-image, relationships, work, health, prosperity, significance. That's the red pill. And that's how we live our life. Everything is powered by the red pill.
Definitely. And I'll even add a little bit to that as well with on the coaching mindset, because again, it's very, especially when you're starting to coach someone, you almost have a compelled feeling to just spew information and tell them about your experiences. But what a lot of times, at least I came to the realization of, is that they have to come to the realization for themselves. Because at the end of the day, you could tell someone until you're blue in the face to do something, but until they internalize it, until they realize that this is a path they want to take, no change occurs. So the transformation that occurs in a coaching relationship is that realization. So you as a coach are really trying to get them from here to here, but they're the ones who tread the path, not necessarily you. You just are the conduit to getting them from point A to point B. So
I want to speak to that because I think you raise a really important point there. Part of the reason why I stopped helping people for free was because transformation happens in the transaction. If I go talk to Jeff and he tells me to do something, it's a mere suggestion, right? Yeah. If I pay Jeff, he's a consultant, right? And the level of expertise and the knowing that he's actually engaged and invested in the outcome because I'm paying him for the service is a game changer. I think what we try to do is get support from the pack, and they're like, oh yeah, go ahead. But they don't ever really dig in and see what the actual assumptions are and actually talk to you about the potential risk, because it's just that thing that's over there that you're doing. And it's probably a series of other things that you've been working through, and they're loosely following along versus entrenching themselves in it. And so the way that I like to describe coaching in our model is we're tour guides, not travel agents. Yeah. We are going with you on the journey, and we're telling you to look out for this and watch out for that. And you can listen to us or not, but we're going to let you know that it's aware, it's there. A travel agent's going to give you a ticket and tell you to go get on the plane, and they'll see you when you get back. And both of those things work for some people, but I just believe that we can add the most value when we go on the journey with the person.
That's a great way to actually look at it. I like the tour guide instead of the travel agent. That's to put that into perspective. That's just, I like that a lot. And speaking of people listening, I know that you have podcasts and you're trying to build a brand. What are some like the benefits that you've experienced with the podcast and like your brand building efforts?
I don't have to go introduce myself to people. That's the biggest one. They know who I am. They know what I'm about, and I get reminders based on the brand that we've built that it reminds them. Somebody saw a picture of somebody from the Matrix one day when they sent it to me. It was like, I thought about you, right? Or, somebody has to make a decision and it's tough and they thinking about giving up, and they'll think about a video that I shot while I was running the 6 mile run or whatever it is. But those things continually begin to pop up. And I think the last piece of it is it allows me to fulfill the significance piece, right? So there's 3 podcasts that I'm tied to pretty deeply. Compression. We've got Dream Catchers, which is one where I bring on people who dropped out of corporate America and tell the tools, tactics, and tips that they use to do that. And then Multifamily Missteps, which we bring operators on and have them tell their war stories. And then we've started this new segment called Multifamily Kickstart as a part of Multifamily Missteps, that we talk to people who are trying to get in the space and try to get them a kickstart on their journey and just let them ask whatever questions they have for, 25 minutes or so. And so the whole goal there is just to help people move along and get the opportunity to talk to people about the things that most people are uncomfortable talking about. Hey, I'm stuck. How do I get going? I found out this mistake by making it, and here's how I fixed it. And hopefully you don't ever have to make it again. And, with Dream Catchers, I always ask, was there a rock bottom? Was everything on the line? People like to talk about how great things are. They don't like to talk about the struggles, but the struggles are part of it so that people don't get confused about whether or not there's a challenge. And then Compression. Logan's just opening up and letting you guys in, and he's giving you his weekly coaching session with me unedited, right? And just letting you see how we work through these things so that he can close that $100 million in the year. And I don't think it's going to take the whole year. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. For those of you guys who don't know, Logan is an investor, and he's located in Kansas City, and he's doing some really big things. I've been following him on LinkedIn. It's pretty impressive. And obviously you guys teaming up is a great thing for the investor community. So that's awesome, man. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you in this podcast, and I know it's a topic that's pretty near and dear to your heart, is a problem that we see a lot of times in the commercial real estate business and really a lot of industries. But I've noticed myself in the commercial real estate business, and that's really the lack of diversity in the business. So I know that's a concept that you've talked about a lot. I just wanted to know, I guess, what are some of the ways that you envision to be able to kind of shrink the gap between, I'm from a Latino descent. We don't see a lot of Latinos, to be honest with you, in the commercial real estate industry. And I'm assuming the same in the African-American community. So I just wanted to kind of touch base with you to see what your thoughts are and how you can kind of bridge that divide.
Yeah. So I scour the social media platforms to find people of all different backgrounds, right? But with the intense focus on making sure that my microphone is given to people who traditionally don't get opportunity to speak, right? We've got the Mid-Atlantic Multifamily Investing Conference that's coming up September 17th through the 19th. We're going to have the most diverse group of apartment investors in the country speak, right? The whole goal here is, one, help them get some reps, get on tape, get yourself used to presenting in front of a stage, because you might not be ready to go talk at Dealmaker Live or Best Ever Conference or some of the other more mainstream, larger, higher ticket, from a actually being able to present standpoint. And I want them to get that experience. So I think it's my responsibility to create opportunities for them to speak. Now, with that said, I've had multiple people turn me down because they didn't feel like they were in a place where they should speak. But I feel like, again, it's my obligation, it's my duty to make sure that we create the space for it to happen and invite people and challenge them. And I'll challenge your listeners. If you've had success and you're not sharing that with other people, you're doing a disservice, right? You're doing the community a disservice. And I don't tell this story all the time, but it's one that I think is pretty pressing. So I had one mentor who exposed me to their coach, had another mentor who was the only African-American executive in a company that has 17,000 employees. And I would say, Craig, you make it possible. You make me believe it's possible for me, because I don't see anybody else, but I see you. So that means that I can do it too. And I realized when I was going through that whole, I just wanted to put up the logo, that I wasn't showing anybody else that it was possible. I am probably the most opposite to what most people would think is a multifamily investor. I've got really long hair. I've got visible tattoos, and I don't put on a suit regularly, right? I wear a t-shirt that says I took the red pill just about every single day, right? And so does that look like wealth and prosperity for most people? Absolutely not. But I want to shift that image. And so I think, Jeff, you asked about building a brand. I want my brand to be something that shows people what is possible. And it doesn't matter what you look like. It matters what your value is. Now, I'll go toe to toe with anybody. If you want to talk about underwriting or construction, I'm competent. But, judging a book by the cover, I want to try to pull down those barriers and walls so that people are more open to getting to know other folks, because I think it really is about the value that you create and not what you look like.
100%. And again, I think you, by setting the example, I'm sure you're inspiring a lot of people to pursue a similar path. And obviously with your home environment, you probably didn't have a lot of entrepreneurs or people that were in the commercial real estate industry around you on a regular. Yeah. You didn't have anyone around you on a regular basis that was able to impart wisdom and give you advice and lead you along the path to where you are today. And like you said, as a leader, it's your obligation to give back, put out the hand, and allow people to kind of pursue that path if that's something they're super passionate about, and setting the example so that, okay, I see Jerome doing these awesome things. He's already kind of trailed the path for me. Let me go ahead and see if I can follow that path and really make something of what I really want to do. So I commend you for that, really.
Thank you.
For sure. That I took the red pill, man. That you just keep rocking that. That's awesome. And if you do that every day, that's a daily reminder, not only for you, but everyone that you influence around you. That's just before you got on. I read that, and it kind of gave me a chuckle. But then I was like, you know what, he's on to something here. So,
thank you.
But speaking of reading, I like to ask people this: is what is one of the most impactful books that you've read? It could be late, or it could be ever. That's kind of transformed you, or motivated you, or just brought to you where you are today.
Yeah, The Four Agreements was the Quake book for me. I think it's Paulo Coelho. I can't remember right now, but yeah, it absolutely changed everything for me. And the one thing that stood out probably at the highest level is just being impeccable with your word. If you can be impeccable with your word to yourself and to others, everything else will work its way out. Because even if somebody doesn't like what you have to tell them, they can plan their life. And I think that's what people want more than anything else, is the ability to plan their life.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And I think that lends itself again to integrity, right? Holding yourself to that standard and saying, look, I'm not willing to compromise on my, number one, the truth, right? Even if it's a tough pill to swallow, referencing the red pill, you can at least make someone, they may not like you, but they will respect the fact that you're willing to tell it like it is. Because again, that in life, it's always great to know where you stand with someone. So that's awesome. So to round out the podcast, first off, I mean, it's been amazing having a conversation with you. And one of the things that we often do for this podcast, and in particular for our listeners, is to ask our guests to contribute something to the CRE treasure chest. Essentially what it is a repository of resources that we make available to our listeners to learn more about commercial real estate, the construction industry, et cetera. So I just wanted to kind of pose the question to you. What did you have to bring today for the listeners?
I'm going to pivot. I was going to give your listeners something else, but I'm going to give them something I haven't given out in a really, really, really long time. And so I've got a book. It's an ebook. It's the first 90. What do you do in the first 90 days? Right? You take over a property. What do you do now? And I think it's just an outstanding read. And it's something that nobody talks about. They feel like you close the deal and you just throw the keys to the property manager and you're done.
Yeah.
Well, brother, I can tell you, you're not. And a lot of these properties are wild animals, and that's why you got to come in and tame them. And you should know what your action plan is on the backside of that. And so, it's probably, 50 pages or something like that. But I think for your listeners, it'll be tremendous value.
Really appreciate that, because I know that in the past, getting a hold of properties and stuff, I would have loved to have that type of resource at my disposal to know what to do, what's next. And if someone else wanted to learn more about you and contact you, what way did you want them to reach out or follow? Or
the best way is myersmethods.com, MYERSMETHODS.com. And they can get a free 4-step guide. That was the thing I was going to give you, but they can get that independent. And then, I'm on LinkedIn playing in the halls every day. So Jerome Myers, MYERS, and you'll find me. We're hanging out.
Yeah, I'll attest to that. He's super active on LinkedIn. We're actually in the midst of a challenge right now on LinkedIn for those of you guys who are listening. And he's super active on LinkedIn. So if you like to learn more about what he's doing on a day-to-day basis, definitely follow him on LinkedIn. Well, Jerome, again, we really appreciate your time. Thank you again so much for stopping by. For those of you guys who listen to the podcast, please, please, please rate the podcast, drop a comment, tell us what you'd like to hear next. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and ensures more and more people can actually listen to this podcast. And hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you guys next time.